Let's go. What's up? What up, y'all? All right, let's go. Hold on, let me get this transition over. Yo, let's go. What's up? What's up, y'all? Today we're covering The Prestige, the great Christopher Nolan. Let's say great Christopher Nolan, 2006 film written by Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan, with an analysis of the book The Prestige from 1995. Now, excuse me, folks. I hope everybody's doing all right out there today. Um, this is going to be this should be a pretty fun one because I think maybe a lot of people or a few of y'all have seen the 2006 movie The Prestige, the Christopher Nolan movie, but probably not many of you have read the 1995 book The Prestige by Christopher Priest. So that's what we're covering today, and we're going to do an analysis of both. These are wildly different. They are completely different works, but they are both disturbing in different ways. And so we're going to be talking about the idea of the double, dissociation, the doppelganger, Poe's William Wilson, the doppelganger, right? We've covered that a little bit before, way back. We're going to be talking about magic, stage magic, Al Crowley magic, um, Houdini. We just recently covered Houdini, Intel ties with magic and how the two kind of correlate, which our friends have gone into in depth, especially our friend DPH, David Patrick Harry, over at Church of the Eternal Logos, who also has a stream following this, immediately following this. Shouts out to our good friend, our homeboy, Church of the Eternal Logos, Kotel. Please, let's go over and watch him after this is over because he's talking about Alan Moore. And then later on tonight, we got a big night tonight because later on after that, we'll be watching our homegirl, Based Homeschool Mama, over on our homeboy, Jay Dyer, Jay's Analysis channel. And then tomorrow, you'll see our good friend Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies live stream. And the two of us will be over on Rachel Wilson, Based Homeschool Mama's new channel. And we'll be talking about Team America, World Team America, World Police. So that'll be fun. That's going to be a lot of fun. Shouts out also to BPF, whose birthday it was the other day. Andy over at the Crucible. So we got a lot going on here, folks. We got a lot to cover. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Or at least it'll be interesting. Hopefully it'll be fun. I think it's fun for me because this is a movie that I really like and I really enjoy. Shouts out to my sister watching out there right now because the first time I saw this movie was the opening weekend. My sister and I went to see it in Williamsburg. Went to see it together and kind of blew my mind. I mean, I already, we'd already seen the Christopher Nolan films, Memento and Batman Begins and such. He also did what he did. He did Insomnia, but this one's totally different, and it takes. There's a lot to unpack here, folks. So there is a lot. I mean, the movie is pretty heavily layered, and it's an enjoyable film because of the feud that these two magicians have. In the film, the magicians are played, of course, by Christian Bale, whom we've covered in other movie analyses that we did. Especially American Psycho. Remember we did American Psycho. Shouts out to Genghis out there for dropping that first super chat. Really appreciate you. Genghis drops a $19.99, a $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Genghis. Really appreciate you. If you want to support the stream, please don't hesitate to smash that like, share the stream, share it with your friends, with your family, put it online, tweet it out or whatever. If you want to, leave a comment for me afterwards. And please, if you can, and if you feel like if you want to, I really would appreciate it if you would drop some super chats or get it directly to me right now through PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. I really appreciate it. We're rolling through these books and we stay grinding. So this is interesting because we're on another 90s book here, 2000 movie, but a 90s book. We're going to follow it just really quickly. We're going to follow this up with, we're going to follow up The Prestige with Bret Easton Ellis's Glamorama, which is our next analysis, which is a 1998 book. Then we've got later on we've got Ender's Game, which is not a 90s book, but we're going to cover that with our friend BPF. And then also we've got Rachel tomorrow night, and we've got a lot more in the works. So we have our Royal Tenenbaums and Rushmore, Wes Anderson, Steve Zissou analysis coming up, sponsored stream. we've got a bunch of stuff coming up. So let's get into the prestige. So the prestige is amazing because first of all, it's got the great Michael Caine. It's got Michael Caine. Forgive my Michael Caine impression, but the way that the book begins is different from the film. So let's kind of we're gonna kind of mingle the two. Um, and we're gonna discuss and sort of separate where the narratives veer off and differ from each other. We're gonna provide some contrast here. But really the book brings out much more of a a kind of dissociative element than the movie does, because the movie is definitely about doubles, but it's pretty meta because the movie is about a a double playing a double playing a double, or I'm the dude dressed as a dude disguised as another dude, right? And so, spoilers ahead, okay? Because we can't do a deep analysis without discussing the works as a whole, and we're not doing a review. We are diving into some of the themes and the motifs within these two works. So it's going to be pretty interesting. So the way that the film begins is that we see the bowler hats. We see these black hats on the ground, right? And we kind of fade out, and then we have Martin Caine's introductory speech. And here's what Michael Caine says. Michael Caine says, hold on, let me pull it up. Michael Caine says, every great magic trick consists of three parts or acts. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, a deck of cards, a bird, or a man. He shows you this object. Perhaps he asks you to inspect it to see if it is indeed real, unaltered, normal, but of course it probably isn't. The second act is called the turn. Forgive my impression, by the way, but the magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled, but you wouldn't clap yet because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back. That's why every magic trick has a third act, the hardest part, the part we call prestige. Okay, so that's sort of a kind of a paraphrase, really, of what he says in the film. But this is different from the book. But what we are introduced to is the fact that shouts out to Amtown who likes that Martin Kind. What we're introduced to here is we get a number of elements, right? A number of um, contrasting images, and we don't know where we are yet. And then we see we kind of cut to Hugh Jackman on the stage, and he has this thing, and we see Christian Bale walk up. He inspects the device on the stage, and he's wearing he's wearing a disguise. We know that because then he walks backstage, and they say, "Oi, who are you?" Right? And I'm part of the bloody act, you fool. Takes off his beard, and he has this mustache, right? He has his mustache. Then he goes downstairs. He goes under the stage, backstage, and we see a Tiresias wasteland, Oedipus Rex blind guy sitting there with his, lightning struck, milky eyes looking up. And then we see what happened. We hear the sort of the electrical storm above, and then we see Hugh Jackman fall into a water tank. And what we're thinking, especially when you watch this for the first time, and especially back in 2006, you're thinking, okay, well, I know a little something. I know about the Chinese water closet. I know about Houdini. So what's the trick here? Well, again, we're not really looking. So what Martin Caine is telling us is that we are the audience, of course, but we're witnessing a sort of a magic show within a magic show within a magic show, because one magic show is that we're the audience watching the film, right? This stage magic, the movie magic. Yeah. And then we're watching a we're watching another production within this because we're watching Christian Bale try to figure out the magic show. And then we're going to find out that this whole thing is also misdirection and that there's something else going on. We don't really know what it is yet. But we see Hugh Jackman fall into the water tank, and Christian Bale's "Hey, right, he's bloody drowning." He doesn't say that, but He tries to get him out, but it's locked. He falls into the water and he drowns. And then later, Michael Caine's going to say, a man once told me you almost drowned, that it was like going home. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, he has a spin on this, and we get the real thing, which is we find out when we find out the trick, which we're going to get into, that it's actually he says, "I lied. He told me it was agony." And this really kind of puts the hook into you in the film because we don't know what's going on yet. But some things happen. We sort of see a montage of what we've later find out is Colorado because it's told in a sort of a nonlinear fashion, which we get flashbacks and we see that Christian Bale is now in prison. He's locked up. We don't know why. We don't know what happened, but then we do. Then we find out we see in the dock, and we see Michael Caine, who is on the witness stand, and he says, I can't tell you the trick. I've got a patent on this. It would ruin my bloody act." And then the judge basically says, "I understand your predicament, Mr. Cutter." His name's Cutter. "And if you want to tell me in private chambers, what's going on." But then we see Christian Bale. Um, a lawyer visits him, and he is essentially like has to sell his trick to him or somebody else, Lord Caldwell. And then we see that we figure that Christian Bale is going to be hanged, not hung. Remember, again, people are hanged, objects are hung. And we see that he's got his magic red ball. Later on, we're going to hear abracadabra, his last words. Well, what does this all mean, right? Well, let's go back. So going back a little bit, what we see is that Christian Bale is playing this guy named Bolden, right? His name's Freddie Bolden, and Hugh Jackman and this is something you don't get in the movie unless you really pay attention, but it's in the book. We find out that Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale are assistants for another magician. The magician that they're assisting for is the guy who plays the computer genius for the media magnate in the Bond movie. Remember when he's basically playing what was the Bond movie about the media magnate with Jonathan Price? Anyway, that's the guy who plays the magician. And that Michael Caine is on the sideline. Shouts out 499 there of Genghis Khan, Slow Boy Whiteboard. Yes, shouts out to Slow Boy Whiteboard. Shouts out to Kristen, our homegirl. Thank you, Genghis. Appreciate you. And we find out that they are assisting for this guy, and that basically Michael Caine is the stage manager. He's standing on the side, and he's got an axe in his hand because um, we're seeing that a woman is being drowned in the Chinese water tank, and um, he's tied up, right? Well, well, we cut to Christian Bale kind of, discussing backstage. Look, he doesn't have any real tricks, right? He doesn't ever take chances. And Hugh Jackman is kind of like, just do the thing you're supposed to do, right? Just tie the knots like you're supposed to. Because Michael Caine says you're tying the wrong knot because if the water gets wet, she won't be able to get out of the knot. And then we see basically that we find out a couple of revelatory things here just about the magic show in general. But this is a theme that's going to play out for the later film and for the book for the story, and that is basically that um, Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman are chosen from the audience to go up and inspect the thing on the stage, and they're supposed to tie the knots around this woman, but they're actually working for the magician. Now that's pretty revelatory. I mean, we all kind of figured that, but it also shows something that I learned in the Houdini book and in this book, which is that the people that are chosen for the stage are not always plants. These two are plants, but they oftentimes what the magician has to deal with and what his assistants have to deal with is all the time they have to deal with rival magicians who will try and sabotage the act because they want to steal it or because they this is going to tie into the sort of quasi intel network that these guys have, which is incredible. Jay has talked so much about how intelligence will choose magicians, will contract magicians to do these things because of their sort of natural um, inherent omerta and their sort of code of silence, their secrecy, and because they already have a network. And this really brings it out because because these guys have an extensive network. They always have eyes and ears everywhere, and that's gonna come up in a second with another act that they see. But, it also brings out one of the themes in the story, which is that we get the 2 characters, right? We get the Christian Bale character, and we see Michael Caine says about him in a kind of an exposition. He says, because Hugh Jackman says, "Why did you pick this guy? Why is he a part of this?" And he says, Michael Caine says, "He's a natural magician." Okay, now Christian Bale's character, Borden, is the natural magician. He's really good at the act, but Hugh Jackman is not a natural magician, but he can dress it up. He's good at the performance. He's much better at the performance than Christian Bale is. So the kind of synthesis between the 2 would be the Houdini character. It would be the great magicians of all time. But that's gonna the kind of dialectic between these 2 guys is what's gonna lead into their feud. And so what happens in the movie is that, he says, "Tie the knots." He says, "They will hold." Well, in the following act, what happened? And we also I'm sorry. Oh, we also learned that, Christian Bale was hired by Michael Caine because Michael Caine had hired him to spy on another magician. So we already have this sort of espionage-esque element within it. Um, and so then what we see is Piper Perabo, who plays the wife of Hugh Jackman, um, will do the next act, and then she drowns. She drowns in the water tank, and then Hugh Jackman will blame this on Christian Bale and say, "What knot did you tie?" And he says, "I don't remember." And you think when you're watching the movie that this is that he either really doesn't remember or he doesn't wanna say, but that he didn't do anything wrong. You wanna give him the benefit of the doubt, but because of the nature of layered, unreliable narrators, and there's no unreliable narrator in this in the sense that we do have Michael Caine who gives a voiceover, but the book really brings this out because the reason for the feud is completely different in the book. And I'll get to that in a second. Um, but because of this, Hugh Jackman has a blood feud with Christian Bale, and that's gonna lead to the 2 characters really going at each other. Okay. Um, and should I tell you what happens in the book? The reason for the feud in the book while we're on this little train. We're on this little train. Um, the reason that they have the feud in the book is because Hugh Jackman, by the way, is also not who he says he is because Piper Perabo mentions in the movie something that you kind of lose. She says, "Yeah, but you changed your name." Because they say, "Who is this Borden guy? Who is he? We don't know who he is." And she says, "Well, we don't know who you are." Right? Michael Caine says, "Well, who are you?" And that's because we learned that Hugh Jackman has changed his name because he says, excuse me, he says, "Well, I changed my name because my family doesn't look on entertainment and magic as something respectable, so he had to change his name to make his own way." Well, that's kind of forgotten about in the film. Um, in the in the movie, what we learn is that Hugh Jackman's character, whose name is Angier, later on the Great Danton, so he has 2 names already. Oh, man, excuse me, folks. Shouts out to Hotel out there, DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos, our homeboy. We'll be watching you right after this. What we learned is that Hugh Jackman is actually from a noble family. He's a part of the peerage. His family is a landowning gentleman. He's a noble, and that the Angier character, that's not his real name, has an older brother who's who has inherited their property and their land and their title after their dad dies, and that Hugh Jackman is kind of lost in the sea of his life, and he decides to pursue magic. This is something he gets at boarding school when he's really young. Shouts out to Rachel out there, Rachel Wilson, based homeschool mom. And so that's interesting because, sorry, folks, geez, what we learn is that both of the characters are unreliable. Are sort of unreliable characters. They both have something to hide, and you forget that when you're watching the film. Um, so then, what happens in the book is that uh, Danton or Angier is doing an act, and he has no idea really who what's his name Borden is. Okay, and Borden, played by Christian Bale in the movie, Borden goes to see his act. Oh man, sorry. And then after that, what happens is after the act, he tries to sabotage the act, and as he's walking out, he pushes aside his assistant. His assistant is played by Piper Perabo in the, uh, in the film. That's his wife. His wife is pregnant, and as he pushes her down, of course, you know what's gonna happen. I got a cough, folks. Hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, we're still alive. So what happens is he pushes her down. She is pregnant, and she ends up miscarrying, and she loses the baby. Okay. And so obviously that drives Hugh Jackman to take revenge on Christian Bale. Christian Bale, this is interesting because this is mirrored in the book because later on Hugh Jackman is going to do this to a woman at the end of the story. Okay, because he gets lost in his vengeance and his feud. And but what happens in the film is when the woman dies, when the wife dies, this gives Hugh Jackman raison d'être, right? It gives him an MO. It gives him a reason to do everything he can to try and destroy Borden's act. So what we see is that also, oh yeah, my sister says tying knots. Tying knots is interesting because we obviously see there is magic tied in with Al Crowley magic, and we just read in the Witches of Eastwick that the witches are adepts at knot tying because they tie up knot the knot tying symbolizes the the sort of way that they tie people into each other and that they rip them apart or they bind, right? They bind people to their hex, which is what happens in the Witches of Eastwick. Now that doesn't literally occur in this, but it's actually a lot darker than that. Okay. Because the two characters are um they're sort of inextricably tied to one another, and it's not a fate because they make choices throughout this, and that is going to tie into, forgive the pun, um, that's gonna tie into what these characters are willing to do in order to, play the trick. Now, one thing that happens after they see this, after they've done that first, after we're introduced to the characters is Michael Caine says, "If you really wanna see a great magician, go to the Yellow Canary Theater," or whatever it is, "and go see, this Chinese magician." So this is key. They go and see this Chinese magician, and what the guy does is he's this old man, he's in silk. He comes out and he holds up a, you know, they're playing instruments and he holds up a, you know, a little silk curtain and he reveals that there was an empty table and now there's a large goldfish bowl full of water with the goldfish. And so the question is, how did this guy, how did he manifest this? How did he make this thing appear? Well, Christian Bale figures it out. And Christian Bale says, you're not watching closely. The trick is, I know everybody knows this, watch it, that's seen the film. But if you haven't seen the film, or perhaps you didn't catch this part, this might be fairly revelatory. He says, the trick isn't what happens on the stage. That's not the magic trick. The trick is here. Watch this guy. So this old man comes out, and this was in the Houdini book that basically he figures out Hugh Jackman illustrates this that when the guy walks out, he's incredibly strong. This guy's buff, but he looks like an old man. And he carries a giant the water bowl in between his legs, between his knees, the entire set. So he's on it. Let's say he does an hour set, right? He's on the stage doing all of his magic tricks and he's shuffling along. Well, he's shuffling because he's carrying the water bowl the whole time. So he never leaves the stage because he already has it there. So the misdirection, this is pretty profound. The misdirection is Chung Ling's entire life. In other words, Christian Bale points out that this guy is appears the way he is because that's the trick, because it allows him to do this one act, this one trick with this bowl, because that's his act. In other words, this guy is so dedicated to his magic act that everything he does, he never gives it up. When he walks from backstage into the carriage, when he goes home, when he's walking around in the windows, when he's talking to his family, when he goes to the bank, when he goes to the grocery store, he's always the old man. And this is in the Houdini book because Houdini witnessed a guy do this, and it was an Englishman. It was like a young Englishman who had made himself up to look like the great Chung Ling, who was this Chinese act, and that guy saw it was a real Chinese act that he saw. So, in other words, that is the key to the entire movie. But what you don't get, this big spoiler, what you don't get is that at that point in the movie, Christian Bale has already figured out the trick. And that this part where he is expressing, expressing like surprise that the guy has this as an act, he's already developed his act, and that's his act because he's not surprised at all. He's already there. So I'm going to get to what that means in a minute, but this is interesting because Hugh Jackman takes this in a completely different way. So in the next scene, what we see is that Christian Bale is doing Borden is doing a magic act like in a small music hall in London, and Jessica what's her name? Not Jessica Chastain. The one we covered, the actress in Transcendence. Jeth, what's her name? Not the Scarlett Johansson character, but the woman who plays the wife. Um, she's the daughter of the theater director. Anyway, somebody will say it in the chat. I'm sure Jeth will know it. So, she is sitting there with a child, and they're watching this act. And a magician comes up, and Christian Bale's the assistant for this guy. And what he does is he picks a bird out, he puts it in a cage, and he puts it on the table, and then he has a little silk cloth. Bam! He makes the bird disappear, and the child starts crying. Then um, the magician comes down and he has the bird and he pulls the bird out from behind the kid's ear. But what does the kid say? This is crazy because I think unless you're watching closely, this takes multiple like you really have to look closely at this. The kid says that's not the bird. The bird is dead. He killed the bird. Rebecca Hall, thank you. Not Jessica. Rebecca Hall, thank you, Jethro. Um, and Christian Bale looks at the kid and he says, "Your son is a very clever boy," because there are two people in this that have figured out the whole thing from the very beginning. One is Michael Caine, who tries to tell him what the act is, and the other is the boy, the little boy. And then later, remember, he tries to appease the little boy. He pulls the coin out from behind his ear and he says, "Don't ever tell anybody the trick because the minute you do, they will not respect you. They won't love you. They only want to be fooled." Okay, so what do we learn in the next scene? We learn in the next scene that Michael Caine, we see Christian Bale go back to his workshop and he takes the cloth off, and there we have this poor dead bird in this cage. So, what that means is that they are willing to sacrifice, they're willing to make a sacrifice every night. They really do kill this bird, and it's just another bird through misdirection. Okay, because the cage snaps shut and kills the bird, right? The boy figures this out, but nobody else. They have a willing suspension of disbelief beyond what they even have a concept of when they're watching the act. So so what does that mean? Well, who is the bird in the cage? Right, if we're gonna take this on to the next level. Well, one of the birds in this sort of in the cage, right, in the golden cage. It's a great song, by the way, Golden Cage. You ever heard that song by The Whitest Boy Alive, remixed by Fred Falk? Great song, Golden Cage. Look it up. Anyway, um, one is, of course, Rebecca Hall. Because she falls in love with Borden, Christian Bale, and throughout the movie, she's continuing. This isn't in the book, but she's continuously saying, um, "Do you love me?" And Christian Bale looks at her and says, he keeps saying, "Yes, I love you." And she says, "Not today, you don't. I don't believe you." Other times she says, "See, today you mean it." Okay. Well, should I get to what that means? I'll get to that in a second. The other person in the cage, of course, is Hugh Jackman himself. Because number one, he's literally in the cage because the cage is the electrical cage that Tesla makes for him as part of the experiment. Right, and the other sense is that he's in a golden cage. This guy he's a nobleman with money, and at the end of the movie, remember, he sort of retreats into his former personality, which is his true self, which is that of a nobleman. He's Lord Caldwell or whatever. This is kind of a play on Macbeth, Macbeth being Cawdor. Um, but that allows him to escape, death in a sense, and that's really what the film and the book are about. It's a kind of a transhumanism because the book is much more about this. Because, um, sort of accidentally and through his feud, what he's really doing here, what the Angier character, the Hugh Jackman character is really doing is trying to escape death. He's trying to live forever. And he actually achieves this in a way, which I'm gonna get to. But they want to Christian Bale's character is more of like he wants to sort of transcend death by creating, but not and it's not a true creation, it's a mimicry, and he's self-aware of that. But he wants to, leave something behind for himself, right? Or for he wants to leave something behind, something that people will remember him by. He wants to create this great act. But Hugh Jackman wants to literally his character, Angier, wants to literally live forever, in the book. Now, uh, then what we see, sort of skipping ahead, is that, um Christian Bale and, Borden, his name's Freddie Borden, comes back and he's got an act of his own. And his act is called The Transported Man. And this is like the classic magic act, but it's pretty cool. It's done really cool in the film. And what he does is he has he has doorways set up on the stage. And this is this is kind of a I don't know, this is kind of magic itself because the doorways sort of represent a Yakin and Boaz, right? They're kind of, twin pillars, and you're supposed to sort of walk through one door and get to the doors of percep when the doors of perception are cleansed, things will appear as they truly are infinite. It's sort of a Blakean Gnostic idea of magic, right? But it's also just pure entertainment in the film. And what he's doing is he walks through one door and he throws a ball, he shuts the door, and then he walks out of the other door and he catches the ball. Right. So so Christian Bale's like, how does he do this? He gets a new assistant who is Scarlett Johansson, and they work and act together. And then what ends up happening is he says, I need you to spy on Christian Bale. So she's like, okay, I'll do it. Tell me how his act goes. So he goes, she goes, and she becomes Christian Bale's assistant, but pretty much like right away, she's like, look, he hired me to spy on you, but I'm just telling you because I actually wanna work for you because that guy sucks, and the reason that she thinks he sucks is because at one point when she's talking to him, she's like, "You gotta do this act," and she's like, "What about your wife?" And he's like, "Forget about my wife," his wife who's just died, and so Scarlett Johansson's like, "No, this guy's insane. I don't like him." So she's gonna spy for him, right? So she's at one point she steals his diary, which is in a cipher, and she takes it back to him, and he has to decode the cipher and all this stuff. That's another form of misdirection because we learned that he reads the entire diary, he figures out all the tricks, but the final trick is the final prestige is not in the book. He doesn't put that in the book, and he says, "I know you're reading this, Angier, right now." Well, then later, Hugh Jackman's gonna do that to him when he's in the jail. So the question is, like, who's gonna succeed? Who's gonna win this sort of magic battle, right? Well well, Hugh Jackman goes off, and he goes to Colorado, and he goes there in pursuit of Tesla because he at one point, he's in London, and he goes to a London exhibition of Tesla with his big machine, his big electrical machine, and, of course, Christian Bale's already there watching. These guys are so dialed in. They're always at the things together just by accident, right? And he goes there and he walks up the mountain. He's in Hot Springs. He walks up the mountain and he walks up to the fence. This is a pretty cool scene. He walks up to the fence, and of course, we know dramatic irony. We know that the fence is going to be electrified. It is, and then out comes what's his face playing the assistant, who is the guy who plays Gollum. Right, great actor. What's that guy's name? I got too many names going on in my head right now. Somebody help me out with that guy's name. The guy who plays Schmeagol and he plays King Kong and all that. Great actor. Well, he comes out and he's like, "I told you, Edison boys, to stay away." So now we get Edison introduced to this. So we get like a sort of an exposition with Edison and Tesla right in the background, and we know that Tesla is here because he's sort of hiding from the Edison Andy Serkis. Thank you, Jethro. Of course, the Kang, Jethro. He's hiding from the Edison guys, but also he's being financed by JP Morgan to do these experiments. And then basically he's like, I want to meet Tesla. So then he gets an introduction to Tesla, who is of course played by David Bowie. He's played by David Bowie. And David Bowie is, by the way, fantastic as Tesla. He's perfect to play Tesla. I mean, he does it, it's really great. He walks out of the electrical storm, and he just downplaying it, right? And he comes out, and what we learn is that Hugh Jackman is there to finance him to get him to build a machine for him. Tesla has been lighting up the entire town, right, with free electricity. It's free. It's, in exchange for, like, a couple of nights a week or whatever, um, doing his experiments, and there's no electricity, but we also go into this field, and there's light bulbs everywhere, and it's like, "Yes, energy, Mr. Angier. Everything is energy," right? And one thing that they don't talk about is that in the book, the reason that Tesla situated his lab there is because it's at the base of a 10,000-foot glacier. It's at the base of this mountain where there's lightning storms, and he can also predict the weather. He has a pretty accurate representation of weather prediction based on storms. He can forecast the storms all throughout Colorado. And he's like, "Why don't you patent this? You can make a fortune with this." And Tesla's like, "I'm not interested in that. That's only a means to an end because I need to know when the atmosphere is highly charged with electricity, then I can harness it and do the experiments and whatever." But so basically he stays, he's on sort of an extended trip to Colorado, and he meets with Tesla, and Tesla tells him like, "Yeah, I'll do this thing for you, but it's incredibly dangerous." And I don't mean dangerous to your body, I mean dangerous to your mind and to your soul because you're asking me to do something that he says, how they talk about man's reach man's grasp outreaches his whatever. Well, he says basically that the truth of it is that human beings, and this is pretty revelatory, he says that human beings are only capable of accepting and understanding change a little bit at a time when it's a huge change, and that what you're asking me to create is something that is so unbelievable people aren't going to be willing to accept it, which is pretty clever because it shows that something that this guy can create in the movie, right, where that would change the way that human beings think about physics and all this stuff, all this nerd stuff is basically, people aren't ready for it. So the best way to do it is in a magic act where it's already unbelievable. Does that make sense? So, so what is it that he creates? Okay, well, let's get into that. So what he creates is, and this is different from the book. What he creates in the film is he puts a hat down, okay, and he charges it with electricity in this little cage. And then we remember that the first scene in the movie was all of the hats lying there. Okay. But at this point in the movie, we kind of forget about that and we think, okay, well, nothing happened. And he's like, interesting. But then as Hugh Jackman is walking down the mountain, he sees all of these hats lying there. And then so they grab Tesla and Andy Circus, they come down, they measure the hats, and they go, this is not, this is not like the hat that you had. This is the hat. Because Hugh Jackman's like, he says, "Don't." Uh-oh, hold on, cut out. Reconnecting. There we go. We're reconnected. Sorry, I dropped it for a second. I don't know what happened, but anyway. So yeah, so we're back. So then he says, "Okay, we got to change this. We've got to try this with organic matter." And so Andy Circus brings out his cat. Right. Yeah, chat's going down for a second. If you're watching this on the replay, we'll come back. It'll come back. Okay. So he says, "You asked me to do this with this cat, and this is my kid's cat. So you promise don't hurt this cat." And he says, "Don't worry about it. We're not going to do that." He puts the cat in. We think he's going to electrocute the cat. It's different because it's organic matter. In the book, he talks about how it's actually easier to do what he's going to do with organic matter than with something with a with something with a hat, right? A concrete object with no living matter. Well, then what happens is the cat is still there, okay? And then he builds the machine. Edison's guys come, they destroy the lab. And so we get this sort of backstory with Edison and Tesla and their war. They destroy the lab, and then the guy at the desk, who looks a lot like who looks a lot like what's his name? He looks a lot like the guy who he was in the Bond movies. He's a bald guy with glasses. And he was in Halloween. God, I can't think of people's names tonight. What's the guy's name who played the doctor in the first Halloween? He looks exactly like that guy. The guy that JD does the impressions of. I can't remember his name. He says, I thought it, prudent not to tell Edison's boys about your box. So we go in and we see the box. Now, the box is interesting. Jay's done the analysis of the box, of course, which is great. And ties into this a little bit, but really Donald Pleasance. Again, thank you, Jethro. But what it is it looks like it's made of wood. It's on these casters, and it looks like a sarcophagus slash it's a pyramidal object with no capstone, right? Because that plays into the fact that obviously these guys are sort of uh they are magical agents of misdirection and lies, and that they are in a way in their sort of simulacrum working for um this this sort of Satan energy of the great lie, right? Which would be the cap of the pyramid. Satan at the cap of the pyramid. But there's no cap on the thing. Okay. And we still don't know in the film what this is. We don't know what this object is. Well, then we cut back to London and we see that there is a new transported man. Well, the new transported man, I'm skipping over a lot, but the new transported man is essentially Hugh Jackman is standing on a stage. It's just the object. He plugs it in, he rolls it all out. He's got all of his stuff charged, and he walks into the thing. It charges him, and then he disappears. And then we see him appear in the balcony at the back of the theater, and he's standing up there, and it's him. Now this is crazy because the transported man is one thing, right? On the stage to another part of the stage. But this is different because he appears at the back of the balcony, and there's no possible way he could get up there. And he kind of raises his arms high, right? And he says, "Man's imagination, exceeds his grasp," or whatever. But when earlier on, when he was talking to Cutter, who is Michael Caine, he says, "I don't know how he does it. How does he do it?" And Michael Caine says, "It's easy. I figured it out." And this kind of goes by the wayside in the movie, but he says he uses a double. It's clear he uses a double, right? Well, in the meantime, what's happened is Hugh Jackman has a transported man, and he tries to copy it, and he hires a double, right? He hires this actor who looks exactly like Hugh Jackman, but he's got these teeth, and he's playing a very campy version of a stage actor, and he's drinking ale, but he's great at presenting. Well, Christian Bale kind of he finds him through his weird intel network, and he tells him, "Look, man, I hired a guy once." The thing is, when you hire a double like that, it's interesting because the guy ends up sort of taking possession of you and taking all the credit. And you're this actor, you're this great actor, and you're on the stage, but you're not getting any of the credit for this. So then he ends up breaking his leg. Hugh Jackman, by the way, when he breaks his leg, is pure Byronic. He becomes the Byronic hero or the Byronic anti-hero. You see him hobbling up the mountain, right? He's kind of the wanderer above the sea of fog. He's standing there. He's all in black. He's got his gimp leg, right? Byron had his club foot. Um, but what Michael Caine said is interesting because Michael Caine made the point that this was a double, and Hugh Jackman then plays into this and has a double. Now, Hugh Jackman is already a double, right? He's already a double of himself, which makes him, in a way, a prestige of himself. Because remember, in real life, he's a nobleman, right? He's this noble guy. He's landed gentry. He's a part of the peerage, and he's got this hereditary title coming. His brother dies. He's going to inherit it. But he's got this whole other identity with his wife. And then he has this whole other identity with a mistress. But the question is, what is Christian Bale's other identity? Well, Michael Caine points it out. He says, "Look, man, the simplest you still don't understand the magic trick in terms of the entertainment value. The whole thing is that when the trick first appears, the presentation at the beginning, the magician will employ all of his powers to misdirect the audience. He'll have a beautiful assistant. He'll have, look at this over here, look at the machine, but you're not actually looking. You're not looking at what he's doing. And so what is he actually doing? Now, Michael Caine figures this out because what ends up happening is, and we learn this. Okay, so before I say what happens at the end of the film, um, Christian Bale tries to wreck it, right? But Hugh Jackman has set this up so that he drowns, and then that allows Angier or Hugh Jackman to disappear, and then of course Christian Bale goes to prison for this. Okay, and then he's going to be hanged, and they say, do you have any last words? And he says, abracadabra, right? He says the magic words, which is interesting because he's saying the magic words because he's going to reappear after death. And he does, but it's different. He reappears after death because he brings himself back from the grave in a way. Hugh Jackman has learned how to bring himself back from the grave in a completely different way, but sort of in the same sort of misdirected way, right? So Michael Caine he tries to purchase the Tesla machine, and he goes to this nobleman's house, and he doesn't know who it is. It's this anonymous guy. In comes Hugh Jackman, and Hugh Jackman has the daughter of Christian Bale with him, right? In the meantime, um, Rebecca Hall has tried to come to terms with the fact that her husband, Christian Bale, won't tell her the secrets. He won't reveal anything, and that she doesn't believe who he is, and she ends up hanging herself. So she hangs just like her husband's gonna hang, but is it her husband? Okay, well, it is and it isn't. And when Michael Caine goes to visit this, he sees Hugh Jackman and he says, "What have you done? This is one thing, but you've taken his daughter. This is a human life. You've taken her," right? And Hugh Jackman reveals to Michael Caine, "Yeah, it's me. It is me. I'm the guy." Okay. And when Christian Bale, we go back and we learn that okay, so I'm going to reveal this now. I mean, you know this if you've seen the movie, but what we learn is that Christian Bale had already taken into account from an early age what it meant to dedicate himself to his act. And he has, of course, a twin. Okay, he's got it becomes more than just a twin. In the book, what we learn is that Borden, because Hugh Jackman's character Angier goes into extensive like research about this guy, and he sees no, he had seven, siblings, and the closest one in age is 2 years younger, and he doesn't look anything like him. Well, his name is Alfred, and his brother's name is no Albert, and his brother's name is Frederick. So the two combined, they falsify the birth records. So the six becomes an eight, and they are the same. And so he becomes Alfred, Albert, and Frederick, or Freddie. And the great reveal in the movie is that the magician Borden is two people. But the real trick is that they are living the same life, and it's interchangeable because we don't know which one is which. The days where Rebecca Hall says to her husband, you know, I don't believe you today, it's because it's his brother. So in other words, two people are married to the same woman. One is with Rebecca Hall and one is with Scarlett Johansson, the mistress, but it's interchangeable. So 2 brothers are married to 2 women, but each married to 1, if that makes sense. Now, there's a point where we get the reveal that, Christian Bale's like his fingers are injured, like he loses like 2 of his fingers. And so he says, "You don't know anything about sacrifice." Well, the sacrifice is that they have a half-life and they never actually have a full life. So in a way, this is dissociation, right? Because the 2 are split, but they are literally 2 people playing 1 person. So when one loses 2 fingers, the other one has to cut off the other 2 fingers. And this is a point of interest with Scarlett Johansson. She's like, "No, it's one person because I've seen him and his fingers are always the same. They're bandaged, but that's because they falsified it and they made it that way." So what ends up happening is that his assistant, his ingénieur, his engineer is actually his brother in disguise. And it's really clever how they do this through the movie, because when you're watching the movie, you're like, "Who's this other guy?" And you figure that it's Christian Bale, but you don't know what it means yet. Okay. So so then when one brother is locked up and hanged, the other brother takes this as a sacrifice and he's going to continue living. But he's going to continue living as the one guy. They can't do the magic act anymore because it's not two of them. But he ends up killing Hugh Jackman, right? He shoots him. And Hugh Jackman says at the end, he says, Cutter was right. It was 2 of you. It was fucking 2 of you, man. How can I not see this? And he doesn't see it because his vengeance and his obsession gets the better of him, but that doesn't mean it hasn't gotten the better of Christian Bale because he's also done the same thing. So what the real reveal is, how did Hugh Jackman's, um, character do the transported man? Well, okay, so what we see, the reason that he drowned, but he's still alive is because the Tesla machine didn't create a way of transporting the guy to another place. Instead, it doubles him. It clones him. It's a cloning machine, and it is him. So when he appears at the back of the stage, that's his double because they can DPS it into coordinates and they can put him in the back of the stage. That's important for the book. And the other one, the one that is in the machine, goes into a water tank and drowns. The reason that they have the Tiresias, the Oedipal character in the back, the Tiresias blind seer, is because he tells Michael Caine, stay away from backstage. And he tells him that because he knows that Michael Caine cannot see what happens to him. And what happens to him is that every night when he does the magic act, he goes and he drowns in the watery grave, right? Death by water. Remember Wasteland, T.S. Eliot, which we covered. Um, we need to go back to that, by the way. We need to go back to our T.S. Eliot. But anyway, and he says to him, you don't understand sacrifice. You don't understand sacrifice, Borden, because I never know every night whether I'm going to be the one in the box, the man in the box, man in the box. I don't know whether I'm going to be the man in the box or whether I'm going to be the man at the back of the audience. Both are him. So it's just like Christian Bale, but it's through a different form of kind of magical manifestation. But yes, he murders himself every night. Right now, when you murder yourself every night, you are and you're transporting yourself like this, you're obviously opening yourself up to something else taking possession of your body. You're sort of astral projecting yourself through the ether and reappearing. So obviously, if that's the case, then we're opening the story up to the fact that these are demon people. Okay, and what I mean by that is the way that they act is demonic. They're willing to throw away all every accepted virtue and value in order to trick, right? This goes far beyond like entertainment value. That's what makes it a watchable movie because you're learning the kind of depths that the depths, the actual depths in this watery grave that they're able to go to. And every night he transports his grave, his body in his grave to this warehouse. Well, the warehouse scene at the end, the last scene in the film is we see all of the tanks and we see finally we close up and we see that they are all Hugh Jackman. So in the end of the film, what's happened is that Hugh Jackman is dead. All of his altars are gone, but the Borden altar, which is his brother, lives on. And so he kind of wins the battle, right? Even though half of him has been destroyed. So that's what happens in the film. Now this is a lot different than what happens in the book. And the book is this is a great example. We've done a couple streams where a few streams ago, I remember somebody asked, like, is there an example of? um, I think it was Amptown asked, is there an example where the movie is better than the book? Well, and we brought out, The Shining. It's a different work, right? It's Kubrick's work. And Christopher Nolan, to his credit, and Jonathan Nolan, who, Jonathan Nolan, the themes these guys always play into this, right? Because this is a kind of a metaverse thing. It's not really the metaverse, but there are meta themes in here, and we have sort of alternate realities within one reality in terms of the movie, right? And Jonathan Nolan's done this with Westworld, and especially that scene that I brought up before, which is the scene in Westworld season 2 with they said there were 2 of us. They were lying to us. It was, It was only me looking up from the well and the devil smiling back down at you. And you remember that scene with Delios? Well, um, that is, we see a continuation of that in this movie, and the movie is really well done. It's my favorite Christopher Nolan movie in the sense that I think it's really well done. It's layered and it's complex, and we have a number of a number of different misdirected. The form and the content really produced meaning in this in a way that is sort of a synthesized, distilled version of magic and obsession that we don't really see in other films, and it's sort of out of nowhere. It's also interesting that it takes place at the sort of between two ages, right? It's at the end of in a kind of Steppenwolfian Z-big between two ages, where we have the end of the Victorian era in 1901 and the start of the modern era, and that plays into the film and the book because it's like the dawn of the 20th century is going to reveal horrors that and things that you could never have imagined, and that's what happens in the film. The fact that the film is even made and that we are sort of witness to this kind of thing is like it's crazy. It's a really well done movie. So let's talk about the book and some of the ways that the book is different. One of the things, the major differences between the book and the film is that the book, for one, takes place in the modern era. It takes well in contemporary times, and we see this character Andrew, who it starts off and he feels like he has a brother, but he doesn't have a brother, and he's gone back into the records and he knows he doesn't have a brother. It began on a train heading north through England, although I was soon to discover that the story had really begun more than 100 years earlier. So we're going back in time already, right? And so that plays into they kind of cut all that out for the movie, and that's fine. But that is the way that the reveal happens in the book. Um, we see that he gets a note from his dad, and his dad basically tells him about his family, and then he goes and he gets a note from a strange woman, and he tries to seek her out, but the woman lives like they're in England, but the woman lives like on the premises of this weird California cult, which is a lot like the Church of the Final Judgment, and she learns that that these guys worship or they follow a cult leader who is a kind of a Plymouth Brethren Al Crowley character named Father Patrick Franklin, who claims the ability to bilocate. So in other words, he claims that he can be in California and in England at the same time. And obviously that plays into the theme of what we just covered. Smash that like, everybody, please. Don't forget we got Church of the Eternal Logos right after this at 7 o'clock. We're gonna be watching him. Then we're gonna be watching Rachel Based Homeschool Mom over on Jay Dyer's channel, our friend JD, Jay's Analysis. Shouts out to Maddie for that 4.99 super chat. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Please, if you want to support me, don't forget my homies are dropping links in the chat. Cash App, PayPal, all that stuff. Those can get right to me. I gotta get more books because we're rolling through these. We stay grinding here. We're gonna cover Thomas Harris's um Kari Mora, which is the guy who wrote Silence of the Lambs. We're gonna cover The Keep, which is Michael Mann's film and the book version of it. We have another 90s book coming up. We've got Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing. We got Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory, Ender's Game, bunch of stuff coming up, but I need more books and I could really use your support. We're kind of in the dark times here. There's a lot going on in the world. 2006 was a great year. Again, I saw the film in 2006 with my sister. That's the year that I got my master's, that I moved back to America. It's the year that my sweet baby puppy dog, Peggy Sue, was born, who passed away about 2 months ago. So that was a great year. It was a good year. There's a lot happening, and this is certainly a great film. There were a lot of great films that came out like 2006, 7, and 8. And so I wish they were still sort of making movies like that. But yeah, our homeboy Tech Noir Graphics says 2006 was lit for real, boy. Um, but we get this California cult, which is sort of a bilocation California. Al Crowley Remember Al Crowley claimed the ability to that he had mastered the art of invisibility. We covered that in the Al Crowley streams. We did 2 Al Crowley streams. and he demonstrated this by walking down the street and then just sort of disappearing or whatever. We also get trying to hold in a sneeze here. We also got William Wilson, the Poe short story William Wilson. The interesting thing about the doppelganger that I think most people, just to speak on that for a second, the interesting thing about the doppelganger that most people don't understand is that they think that the doppelganger is a double of them in the sense that they're meeting an imposter or they're meeting, a version of themselves within these works of literature. But what Poe demonstrates in William Wilson is that the true doppelganger is not just a double. The doppelganger is you. Now that's a pretty weird esoteric concept to try to dive into, especially in literature. But what we learn in this is that every time this character, uh, recreates himself, he's not just recreating a version of himself. It is him. Part of him dies, right, and a part of him lives, but he is meeting himself. So it's like it's a pretty existential concept, I suppose, in the sense that, it's like Al Crowley talking about crossing the abyss, like he meeting the Karanzan in the abyss. Well, part of that is he's meeting the devil inside of him. He's meeting his demon, right? He's meeting himself. And that's the real profundity of this work is and why it's so disturbing because these people open in the works open themselves up to this and this is what they want, but they crash when they come to this abyss and they remain in hell. And um so yeah, there was an allusion to Church of the Final Judgment and the Plymouth Brethren, the California cult. So um we learned that we learned because the character Andrew in the book gets a copy of his great 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 grandfather's diary, which is what they get in the movie, but it's put to present day. And he's reading it, and he learns that then we shift to a different perspective, a different point of view. So now we take Borden's point of view in the diary, and it's pretty well done in the book, like how because there are elements of James Joyce in this. For instance, um, we learn that uh like, he starts in the present day in 1901, and he says, "I write in the year 1901, my real name is Alfred Borden." But that's not his real name. That's not his real name even in the movie, right? That this is also misdirection. This is like peak unreliable narrator. The story of my life is the story of the secrets by which I've lived my life. They are described in this narrative for the first and last time. This is the only extant copy. Oh, also, he's from Hastings, which is where Al Crowley ended up. And page 41, his thesis is that the real illusion, this is what I wrote. Um, the illusion lived, and he will never drop character. The real illusion is the illusion he lives. Use your illusion. The entire act will be regulated to his life. His life, therefore, becomes the true act. This is still magic, Al Crowley magic with a K, because he's using his will to alter his entire life in subjugation of the act. So he is trying to alter his life and circumstances through a kind of a manifestation of his magical will. The means by which he does this is, of course, his entertainment magic act. We learned that he becomes a master of legerdemain, sleight of hand, and prestidigitation. Also, he meets a character. He learns this from a character named Noonan. Shouts out to Danny Noonan, who was originally going to be played, remember again, by Mickey Rourke. Noonan, of course, also it's not an anagram, but is reminiscent of no one in the spelling. Kind of like in Jules Verne, we get Captain Nemo. Nemo means no man. But this is no one. In other words, he learned it from someone who was a no one, and then he ended up teaching it to himself. And he has a kind of ego death himself because he subjugates himself to his act, and because he and his brother in the movie will live a double life. Now, that doesn't occur in the book, but it occurs with Angier, who is Hugh Jackman's character. We learned that he learns. We have a kind of a treatise on spiritism and mesmerism here, which is interesting because we covered that in the Houdini stream. Um, We learn in this book the ways that the spiritist will will dupe their audience, and one of those is that Angier, the great dance hall, Hugh Jackman, these people are willing to they find out when especially wealthy people have loved ones who have died. Remember, this still happens. We know that these weirdos do this, and this happened recently. This was in the news with Prince Harry. By the way, if you want me to cover Prince Harry's book, please let me know in the comments or whatever, because the weirdest stuff has come out of that, and we do, that's not the canon of literature, but it is a book that we could cover, and I think it would be interesting because there's a lot of creep shit in there, especially about like the red mist. And I remember he said that he got in a fight with Harry and that he saw red mist, which is pure fucking. I mean, excuse my language, but it's pure. Um, that's real Dexter Silence of the Lambs, the Bateman shit. I mean, we read that language specifically in American Psycho, the red mist and the red spray. So that's pretty weird. So if you want me to cover that, let me know and help me out by getting a copy of that. I don't think I'm going to get a signed copy. I don't think that you can do that, but whatever. Um, so remember that Houdini talked about not duping, finding out that the ways that the spiritists were duping their audience, and these guys are willing to take advantage of people's grief in order to trick them, right? And he says, um, for instance, released from a cabinet and his bonds. This is page 65 of the book. When the cabinet was opened, he was found as efficiently tied up as when he went inside and miraculously restored from his mesmerized state, capital M, mesmerized state. The spiritist that got down to his main business. After a short but colorful warning about the dangers of crossing over to the spirit world. We're in a spirit world now, asshole. You see the size of that chicken? You, hold on. What movie is this from? Trivia night, you guys. You see the size of that chicken? You see the size of that cock-a-doodle-doo? We're in the spirit world now, asshole. What movie is that from? Chavez y Chavez. After a short but colorful warning about crossing over to spirit world and a hint that the results justified the risk, the spiritist fell into another trance and soon was in touch with the other side. Before too long, he was able to identify the spirit presence of certain departed relatives and close friends of the people gathered in the room, and comforting messages were conveyed from one group to the other. Remember that Houdini did this. Yeah, and it was the same author as Nightmare Alley author in the Houdini biography. And what we learned about Houdini was that he wasn't trying to debunk the spiritist because he didn't believe in it. He was trying to debunk it because real John Connor gets it. Shouts out to our homeboy, real John Connor out there, our homeboy. Um, he was trying to debunk it because he did believe in it. He believed this was possible. He believed that spiritism, mesmerism. Remember, we talked about that in Van Helsing. That's a quote from Van Helsing in the Dracula, in Bram Stoker's Dracula in the book that we covered. Spiritism, mesmerism, that these things were real. Necromancy was real, but these people weren't doing it right and that they were just duping. But Houdini believed that this was possible, and he had a huge selection of occult books. Houdini, Mason, Breaking of the Wand. We see on page 72, he says, it was a reason for this that the new transported man was the one illusion of mine he never publicly attacked. It was beyond him. Okay, we get on chapter 7, pages 73 and 74, we get the stages of the illusion. So here's what it says. An illusion has 3 stages. First, there is the setup. This is different from the film. There's the setup in which the nature of what might be attempted is hinted at or suggested or explained. The apparatus is seen. Shouts out to Amptown, $2 who pays me not to do the Harry book. Okay. I don't blame you. The apparatus is seen. Volunteers from the audience sometimes participate in the preparation. As the trick is being set up, the magician will make every possible use of misdirection. 2, the performance is where the magician's lifetime of practice and his innate skill as a performer conjoin to produce the magical display. Third, the third stage is sometimes called the effect or the prestige, and this is the product of magic. If a rabbit is pulled from a hat, the rabbit, which apparently did not exist before the trick was performed, can be said to be the prestige of that trick. The new transported man is fairly unusual among illusions in that the setup and performance are what most intrigue audiences, characters, and my magical colleagues, while for me, the performer, the prestige, is the main preoccupation. Then we learned the 6 tricks on page 74. Every trick that has ever been this is pretty interesting. Every trick that has ever been performed falls into one or more of the following categories. Here they are. 1, production, the magical creation of somebody or something out of nothing, right? This is the faux act of creation. This is what's Luciferian, right? Is the fake creation through a kind of a mimicry or a reproduction, right? A false creation. 2, disappearance, the magical vanishing of somebody or something into nothing. 3, transformation, the apparent changing of one thing into another. 4, transposition, the apparent changing of place of 2 or more objects. Again, this is Christopher Priest's 1995, The Prestige. 5, defiance of natural laws. For example, natural law. I can't do a Passio. Hold, please, Passio. Natural law. For example, seeming to defeat gravity, making one solid object appear to pass through another, produce a large number of objects or people from a source apparently too small to have held them. And 6, secret motive power, causing objects to appear to move of their own will, making as such as making a chosen playing card rise mysteriously out of the pack. They do this also through mirrors. We've talked about the mirror, and the mirror um, is an interesting motif in this because the characters are mirrors of one another, and the mirror also is obviously the symbol of the psyche, and we get the broken mirror with the symbol of the fractured psyche. And this is kind of a personified DID. The whole story is a form of a sort of a personified DID. Um, he says what cannot be guessed at is the effect on page 76 the secret has had on my whole life. This is the real reason Angier will never solve the whole mystery unless I myself give him the answer. He would never credit the extent to which my life has been shaped towards holding the secret intact. That is what matters. In other words, it's like we said at the beginning that what matters is the way that these characters are willing and able to live their whole lives in service of the act. It's everything that they do off stage that is the real key to the act. Everything that is observable, you're not looking closely enough to see that it is in service of tricking you. The new transported man is an illusion whose appearance, and doesn't that tie into Intel? If anything ties into Intel and the octopi, uh, the octopus tentacles of the Spectre or organization and the all of the various arms of Intel and the pyramid and the pyramidal structure, it's that. I mean, that's what we see on the news and all this shit every day is this continuous misdirection in terms of these stories in service of some larger trick. Uh I'm not saying that about everything, obviously. I'm not saying that about everything, but I'm saying about the key things, that deal with the bigger picture, which Jay was talking about last night that Richard Grove does so well on, over at, Grand Theft World. The new transported man is an illusion whose appearance has changed over the years, whose method has always remained the same. And then he goes through the various parts of that. Um, we see the double on page 225. I'm skipping ahead here because again, what we see is a kind of a triptych here in terms of what we saw in the Witches of Eastwick. We get the narrative broken up into threes, right? We get various alters, alters in terms of the characters and their psyche, but also alters in terms of the way that the point of view and the perspective changes. Because one, we get Andrew's point of view, and that's told in the first person. Then we get it through we get the story through the diary of Borden, and then we also get Angier's take on this. And then we're going to go back to present day and see how it's really revealed in the novel, which is really interesting. He says, Cutter, who is the engineer, he's the engineer, the stage manager, the guy in charge of moving all the stuff for Angier, and he tells him, but you saw it as I did. He says, he says, that was a double. You still maintain that he uses a double, I queried him. How else could it be affected? But you saw it as I did. That was no double. We saw him clearly before and after. He was the same man, the very same. Cutter winked at me, then turned away and gazed out at the dimly lit houses of Waterloo past which we were presently driving. Well, I clamored of him, what do you say? I say what I've said, Mr. Angier. Sir, he said steadily, you must know of identical twins. There is your answer. But Angier is so wrapped up in this, he cannot see the trick, right? And then there's a clever use of hellish language and damn, not one, but two, damn his eyes. Also, damn his eyes plays into the foreshadowing, the shadow of his vision is shadowed over. Also, the long shadow of his life, the shadow in terms of his shades and his specters that are going to reside, his sort of demonic shades that are going to reside somewhere, which we will get to in a minute. In the film, they reside in the death by water in the Chinese water the Chinese water closet in the watery grave every night. Those are his shades. But he says, let's see, on page 227, we learn about informants and how Cutter and Angier, we learn have a whole series of informants they're always spying on other magicians. All the magicians are engaged every day in spying on each other and on the audience, on the act, on the stage managers, on the stage hands, and you can count on the fact that the stage hands in a lot of these acts are paid informants for the other guys, which is interesting. This is like a whole world. This is like a whole, parallel society um of subterfuge that exists that people aren't aware of. He says, let's see. Um, we learn later on in the book when we get the reveal about Borden, who is Christian Bale on page 358. Two lives made into one means a halving of those lives. While one lives in the world, the other hides in a nether world, literally non existent, a lurking spirit, a doppelgänger, a prestige. So do you get it? Do you understand this? Do you understand why this book and this movie are so clever? Because this is like a personified revelation of the method. Not only do we get the revelation of the fact that the trick these guys are playing, the prestige of that, the real illuminating prestige is the fact that they've tricked you all along into thinking the trick was some other trick and that you want to know the trick. The average person wants to know they want to know the trick, but they don't want to know because they want to look closely, but they're not willing to look closely enough. If anything's a metaphor for this stuff, I mean, I think this is pretty accurate, right? People sort of have this idea that they want to know the truth about things, but they put blinders on. They're willingly the blind guy backstage who is willing to participate in this kind of system, but they don't really want to know. Shouts out to Elias out there who sends $20. Appreciate you out there. Thank you for that super chat. Really, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. That means a lot to me. I could get that Kari Mora book. Um, the note I wrote is that let's see. I just wrote about well, basically what I just said in that the double is them, right? And that you are being played a trick on, but you're not willing to look closely enough. Um, we learned then that Angier is his whole MO is to take revenge, is to avenge himself for the death of his wife. His wife later dies, but no, his wife dies. His wife runs off with their kids. Oh, his first child, I'm sorry, in the book is his child. This also plays into Rimbaud's statement that I is another. In other words, we've read a lot of works. A lot this theme pops up continuously in terms of the canon that we have the outsider, the other, the stranger, the stranger, the Camus stranger, the other. And a lot of times in great works, this is hidden or buried in one's own psyche or soul, right? In the sense that um characters open themselves up for other modes or literally for entities and that they make choices and they're acting of their own free will, but they wanted that, right? They end up in hell by choice. They wanted to live in hell. They want to live in this shadow. right? And this is exactly what Angier does because he says it says on page 364, no man should be so wretched as to have to see what I've beheld. I've borrowed a technique from Borden so that I am as well I so that I am I as well as myself. I am I as well as myself. Remember there was a line about that in The Outsiders that we covered. Remember when we covered The Outsiders? There was a line where Ponyboy is writing to himself and he says that he couldn't confront me. Um he says, uh, I who write this am not the same as the I who died. We became two entities that night in Lowestoft when Borden caused the malfunctioning of the Tesla apparatus. So what happens in the book is that Borden goes backstage, but instead of seeing the whole thing with the guy drowning and all that stuff, he doesn't see any of that. Instead, he tries to unplug the whole system. And what happens is in the middle of Angier trying to transport himself, when he Borden unplugs the apparatus and Angier is inside the Tesla machine, and when he looks up, he sees that he sees himself for the first time and that he is a specter and that he has doubled himself. So now there are two of him. So we have a divergent narrative where we have one Angier and we have the other Angier. And one of them gets sick and he's sort of half of himself, kind of like Borden plays half the role literally, but he ends up like losing, 30 pounds, but he looks the same on the outside because part of his matter has been transported. And now there's an episode of Family Guy about this. Remember Peter cuts off his hand and then a body grows from his hand and he says, I am Retep and I am evil. Right. So he's the Retep for the Peter. He's the backmasking backwards man. He's the double of himself, but he's up there. And the other one, who's now been manifested and energized and appeared, who is also Angier, goes after Borden. And then there's a scene where in the book where Borden wakes up and he's about to be stabbed to death by Angier, but it's a specter man. It's like a spectral man. He doesn't appear wholly human. There's something off about him. He's an other. He's an entity. And Angier at the last minute doesn't sta- doesn't stab him to death. And then we get a excellent references. Thank you. Yeah, you got to throw in Family Guy for the high IQ. I mean, it's a great reference. But it's true because it illustrates this. And then did Rambo write that in First Blood or the one in Afghanistan? Well, interestingly, um, there's a section called Bad Blood. I know that sounds like a joke, but did you know that the inspiration for Sylvester Stallone to call himself Rambo comes from Rambo? That's why he chose the name. Did you know that? And there's a section in A Season in Hell called Bad Blood, and that's part of the reason why he goes to the Middle East because he's not based on Rimbaud, but Rimbaud the poet became a gun runner um, in Abyssinia. Isn't that crazy? Died at 37. 18 was it 1854 to 1891. I've been to Rimbaud's grave in Charleville. I've been to the house in Roche, the old farmhouse, and I've been to the Rimbaud Museum. Anyway, um, so it says, yeah, he's okay. So he says, while I yet lived, I maintained the illusion that I was one. One of me lay dying while the other of me recorded my final concerns. All entries in this journal since the 26th of March have been written by me. We are the prestige of each other. My dead prestige lies downstairs in his open casket and will be placed in the family vault in 2 days' time. I, his living prestige, continue onward. I am the Right Honorable Rupert David Angier. That's one of his names and one of his identities. 14th Earl of Colderdale, husband to Julia, father to Edward, Lydia, and Florence, Lord of Caldlow House in the county of Derbyshire, England. That's his full name and his full title, but do you see how there are doubles of him, but even the him that he's a double of has a double because he goes by a different name, and that's a completely different identity. Do you get how meta this is? So what he does in the book is crazy. It's crazy, you guys. Um, what he does in the book is interesting. Oh, I'm whispering here. Listen, Jack. Listen, Jack, what you need to know. What he does in the book is crazy. So Instead of the whole deal with Borden and all that stuff and the yeah, like John B says, the complex alter ego, what he does in the book is after he does the murder attempt on Borden, the one alter sees his alter die and he decides to transport himself. Can you guess where he's going to transport himself? Where do you think he's going to transport himself in his final act? Well, unification of opposites. Truly, he's going to get in the machine and he's going to transport himself into himself in the grave because the final unification of opposites for this magic man Al Crowley guy inside this cult house is death. He thinks that he will transcend through death, but he ends up trying. What's going to happen here is crazy. Okay. He puts himself in the machine and he transports himself and he says, "If I wake up and I'm in my dead body and I'm dead, it'll be nothing. But if I wake up and I'm in the grave, then we'll see what happens." Okay? So, he does that. Now, what we learn in the backstory is that remember how I said that Andrew, who is the great 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 grandson of Borden, feels like he has a brother? Okay? Well, we learned that way back in the we learned that way back when the girl that he goes to see, she wrote to him because she says, "I think there's a key to our family history because I have this trauma. I have generational trauma. I have um a sort of a TBMC that occurs from this." Yes, exactly, Maddie. She remembers when she was a child, she was 5 years old. Somebody came to the house to visit. Okay, this was Andrew's dad. And Andrew went there and tried to confront the ancestor or the descendant of Angier so they could squash their generational beef, okay? Well, she remembers that her dad got really mad and that in their manor house, they were told, never go into the basement down this corridor. Well, of course, they never did. And he says she's constantly surrounded by feeling watched and that there are faces all around her because she sees the pictures of all of her ancestors. But we learned that no, she was being watched, but it was in a different way than you can imagine. So she remembers that when she was 5 years old, she went down there because she heard yelling and screaming because the dad, when the Borden descendant was there visiting, he took him downstairs into the corridors of the basement. And shouts out to 750 Donuts of Doom, who says the trick for Michael Caine is to say Marco Caine, Marco Caine. Thank you for that. 9.99. Appreciate you there, homeboy. Um, so she remembers that when they were having this argument, they opened up a big thing and there was a machine, there was electricity, and that her dad was yelling, and that Andrew's dad took the child because there was a boy, because they had just like in okay, I know I'm getting a little complicated here. Let me explain this. So in the movie, Hugh Jackman's character, right, um, adopts the daughter of Christian Bale. And then later on, Christian Bale will get the daughter back. Well, in the book, it's different because Hugh Jackman's character, his descendant, will adopt the son, the great great grandson of the Borden character. It's a son, not a daughter. The daughter is Angier's ancestor or descendant. And she watches as Borden's descendant takes the boy because she was living with this little boy. And he comes back to claim the boy, and then he takes him and he throws him into the machine. They turn the machine on, and the boy dies in agony in the Tesla machine. Well, why do you think she's contacted Andy? And she contacts this kid who's now a grown man because he feels like he has a brother. So what's the reveal? Well, the reveal of this whole thing to try. I know this is long story long, but they go into the family vault. Okay, the next day they wake up, they go into the family vault, and they see that all of the graves, all it's a big mausoleum, they're all there. But they discover a secret room. They go back into it, they see a Tesla machine. Then they see a pit. They go in through the pit, and he can hear his brother calling to him. He finds one of the caskets, he opens it up, and he sees his brother exactly as he died. Okay, he's there, and then the voices stopped. So in other words, he did have a brother. It was his twin, and his brother has been Tesla machined and died in the machine. So he's been transported through death into death. But what happened was when Angier tried to Tesla machine himself and clone himself into himself in the grave, he woke up and he kept recreating himself. And so all of the clones, all of the Angiers are in the mausoleum, and they're all there. They're not in the water tanks, they're all there. And then Andrew takes his the body of his brother and takes him out of the mausoleum, but he's being followed, and he's being followed by Angier. And Angier is alive, and he escapes into the snow, into the woods, just like in Frankenstein. And so what we learn is that, remember, we did our Frankenstein stream, and we my thesis in the Frankenstein stream is that Frankenstein is right. Frankenstein is the monster. That is him. That's an alter of himself. And so he escapes into this kind of ninth circle, snowbound, hellish hellscape of the abyss, because he's lost in the labyrinth of his own hell mind, right? Because he's still living. Well, that's exactly what Angier did, but in death, in terms of the mausoleum, in terms of the subterranean grave, he has kept recreating himself, so he's still alive, and now he is illuminated and revealed into the light and walks off. And so it's really, in this, it's both characters who win and lose. It's not, they do that in the movie, both characters win and lose, but it's not that, Angier is shot by Christian Bale's character. There's no shooting. It's that it's much darker, right? That he reveals that he is the prestige of himself. And I gotta say that the last like few chapters of this are really pretty tense. I mean, it's a pretty long book, but it's an easy read. You can read it in a day. And I wrote, Angier walks out, the dead man alive. He has transported himself into the tomb. Um, and so so he learns that the brother had died in a frenzy. On page 398, he died in a frenzy of struggling. Um, I held my page 399, I held my past life in my arms, but I no longer knew what might be standing behind me. Something was, though. And this plays into the fact that, like, he feels like he's being followed. Interestingly enough, this will play into the next stream that I'm gonna do here, and this is Brad Easton Ellis's Glamorama, because in Glamorama, what happens is we have a conspiracy of the fashion world, and there's a reason that they settled, that he and Ben Stiller reached a settlement because of Zoolander, because Zoolander is a lot like Glamorama. And you can see the obvious parallels. And the character is completely like mindless and vapid in the kind of postmodern way where he lives through naming products, but he gets involved in a international terrorism and espionage group and incident, but he is being followed. And that is the whole premise of Poe's William Wilson, right? Because the character feels like he's being followed, and because he feels like he's being followed because he's following himself. That's the doppelganger. Does that make sense? So what do we get out of this? Well, we got that we have two characters whose lives diverge, but they are unified into one character in the service of some sort of magical will and act. We get the transported man, we get the transportation and the we get the transhumanist man. It's not the transported man, it's the transhumanist man, right? Who wants to transcend life through death, but a living death. So it's a bit vampirical. It's interesting that it's kind of both Dracula and Frankenstein, but in a modern setting, which is, I don't know, pretty interesting. Um, let's look at some of these super chats, because we got to get ready for we got to get ready for our homeboy DPH, David Patrick Harry, and Church of the Eternal Logos, and then later Rachel Wilson and Jay Dyer, JD, our friend. Shouts out to These are the PayPal super chats and Cash App, etc. If you want a super chat, if you want me to read your comments or you want to support me, please don't hesitate to do that. You still got time. Or you can do that. Really, you can do that anytime. And oh man, do I really appreciate it. The real John Connor out there, the real John Connor, our homeboy, sends $10 and says, um, for need to hear Crystalline in the Brandon voice, please. Shouts out to shouts out to our homeboy, the real John Connor out there, who, uh, what's the, I went to get some chicken, right? And they asked me when I went to get some chicken, what's with that other thing that you bring? Don't make me bring that up. Lard. What lard? I think there's a purity to it, right? Which is a norm joke. Speaking of which, just for the real John Connor and for everybody else out there or anybody else who wants to hear it, we are going to do a Norm Macdonald stream. We're going to do our Norm Macdonald not a memoir stream. We're going to cover that book because that's a great book. It's a great book, not just because I'm a Norm fan, but it's a well written, pretty high IQ, high concept, Don Simpson esque Norm Macdonald book. So we're going to cover that for him and for you guys. Let's see. Shouts out to our boy Jason out there who sends $10 via PayPal. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Thank you so much. Shouts out to shouts out to Buster. Shouts out to Buster out there who sends $10 via Venmo and says Bay's lit. Appreciate you. And then we covered the PayPals. Thank you so much for that. Why is the baby fat logo a cat? I don't know. Mac Damon. Listen, speaking of our homeboy Mac Damon right there, we're going to be covering Mad Damon in the inaugural stream from our homegirl, Rachel Wilson. Again, based homeschool mama, author of Occult Roots of Feminism. We're going to be on her channel tomorrow night at 6 o'clock is the plan. Um, Norm McDonald's. Return of the Mac. You know the best song about McDonald's is Return of the Mac. And that's not a joke. It really is my favorite song of all time about my favorite prince. Thank you to everybody who super chatted last time. Also, I really appreciate that because you allowed me to go to that dollar menu, and I really appreciate that. We also got to give a shout out to some other super chats that came in over the week. Over the last couple of days, shouts out to shouts out to Alan for that $5 via PayPal. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Jason for that $10 PayPal. Really appreciate you. That was today. Yeah, those were today. Shouts out to Alan for that $5. Shouts out to let's see. Shouts out to Harry who donated Prince Harry out there who donated $10 via PayPal. Also, we had Toledo with 5 Kiwi bucks or 5 American bucks, more in Kiwi bucks, I guess. And then shouts out to Amy who donated $20 via PayPal. Really appreciate y'all. Yo, shouts out to our homegirl Toledo out there who says, "Hey BLA, would you ever consider doing the first 3 Rocky films? If not, that's cool." Listen, Toledo, she sends 5 Kiwi bucks. Listen, I would consider doing one Rocky film, and that's Rocky 4, because Drago, because the training montage itself, if I could change, you can change. Everybody can change. And Gorbachev stands up. Rocky 4, which is one of the great propaganda films, Rocky 4, 1984. It's got robots. It's got the East-West dialectic. It's got the propaganda. It's got James Brown in it. It's got Living in America. Yeah, I consider doing Rocky 4. It was a great film. I had Rocky 4 on videotape when I was a wee child. When I was a wee lad, when I was a wee lad, I had Rocky 4 on videotape that I taped straight off a TV, and I used to have my friends over, and we watch that. Shouts out to my old friend, my homeboy Mo out there, who I remember the first time I had him spend the night, and he came over, and I was like, I've got Rocky 4. I was like 7, and I watched Rocky 4 on videotape, and he was like, "This is awesome." So Yes, Rocky 4, peak CIA Hollywood machine. Um, but that's a happy birthday, Polly. Remember that scene? We should cover Rocky 4. We're gonna be doing this is different from Rocky 4, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're gonna be doing the Wes Anderson films. That was the sponsored stream. Um, we've got a few sponsor streams coming up. We've got that. We got to cover High Wind to Jamaica. We're gonna get to that. We've got the Michael Mann. We've done Heat and Heat 2. Remember, we did that with the book Heat 2, and we did Heat Michael Mann. Most people don't know about the movie The Keep. I would recommend you guys try and watch the movie The Keep if you can find it. The Keep is the movie that Michael Mann made. Michael Mann made. Michael Mann made after Thief with James Caan. James Caan, who by the way always turns like this. Have you noticed that? He doesn't turn his head all the way, he turns his neck. My friend David in Belfast pointed that out a long time ago. And we got a bunch of stuff to cover. Yoruba magic. The only thing I know about Yoruba is that it's mentioned in Yoruba is mentioned in Raisin in the Sun, which we talked about recently. Shouts out to our homeboy DJ down there, down there. That was more New Zealand, I guess. You should get Adam Egret. Oh, is that your name? Fucking change it. on the Norm Macdonald stream. Yeah, maybe I'll put that out there and see if Adam Egat will come on there with us on our little corner of the internet here. Also, we'll be doing the sponsored stream that one of our homeboys out there sponsored on William S. Burroughs. I'll be covering the Yage letters, talking about ayahuasca. That's what I've always called it, the Yage letters. That's what I'm going to continue to call it. Which I first read in 2002. I remember that because I was reading it in September 2002 when I first moved to Bristol for drama school, Bristol Vic, and then I reread it again about 10 years ago. So we're going to cover the age letters and Ted Morgan's biography of William S. Burroughs. Burroughs lived from he was born on February 5th, died in I remember when he died because I remember reading the Rolling Stone article about his death. What was that? 1998? I think it was no, 97 or 98. But he was born in 1914. I remember that because Dylan Thomas lived 1914 to 1914 1953. He was 39. Dylan Thomas's last words, I've just had 19 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record. He didn't have an accent like that. He was Welsh, but spoke with a kind of RP. Great movie, by the way, about Dylan Thomas. This is a total sidetrack if you're interested. So Dylan Thomas died, by the way, actually of a what it says in the Gibbon biography, I think it's that one, is that he actually died of a morphine overdose. The doctor didn't understand that he had liver failure because of his alcoholism, or that Dylan Thomas was an opium addict. Who knows? But that he died of a morphine overdose, and he lived at the Chelsea Hotel in New York, which is interesting. Um, but yeah, I've read Naked Lunch. I've read Naked Lunch twice. And I've got William Burroughs' Word Virus here, the Beat Hotel I've got all the Beat books, all the Beat Generation books. So it'll be interesting to just cover William S. Burroughs. And remember, as Toledo pointed out, he makes a cameo in Drugstore Cowboy, great film, Drugstore Cowboy by with Matt Dillon in it, the Gus Van Sant movie. I'm just rambling here, but Gus Van Sant, remember, also made kind of a great version of um, Richard II, Henry IV, because My Own Private Idaho has that as a play within the play in the film. And is Drugstore Cowboy Hubert Selby Jr.? I remember Toledo. You asked me about doing a Last Exit to Brooklyn stream. Or no, that's not Drugstore Cowboy. That is what's the film with Jared Leto? You guys, with Jennifer Connelly, Jethro. What's the film with Jennifer Connelly and Jared Leto by Darren Aronofsky? Um, with the horrible sequence at the end. What is that film? Can't remember it. I saw it in the cinema in Belfast with my friend David when it came out. And now I can't remember the name of the film. Jeez, I just got too many. I got too many names and products going around. Requiem for a Dream. Thank you, Maddie, out there. Um, I got too many names and products going around in my head, mainly because of this Glamorama book, which covers like part of the postmodern verbiage of the book is that it's constant names and products and films. I mean, I mean thousands of them. At one point, I will tell you that he drops. There's a he already dropped R Maxwell, and talked about his somebody blackmailing through publishing his autopsy photos, and then he mentions the Bronfmans later on in the book. But that's why I got so much going on through my mind. Um, so yeah, so I think that's about it, you guys. Hopefully I got all those covered. Let me make sure I didn't get any other super chats that I didn't cover. Shouts out to everybody who donated. Oh yeah, shouts out to our homeboy Vitaly, who dropped 20 bucks via Cash App. I don't know if I got to that one last time. And let's see. And then shouts out to oh yeah, and of course shouts out to our homegirl Rachel Wilson at Base Homeschool Mom who dropped 10 bucks via Venmo last time. Thank you so much for the support. If you guys want to support me and help me get through the next week and go to the dollar menu, you can support me anytime. Really appreciate it. You can help me get more books. You can help me. Eventually, I need to get a soundboard for this microphone, but that's way in the future. But I'll do that through your support because you guys have helped me out so much here. Please remember to smash the like and share and be there for Church of the Eternal Logos DPH later on in a couple minutes, starting at 7. He's covering Alan Moore. Then a sponsor stream. That's going to be fantastic. Shouts out to JD, who is doing big things every day, big moves, big things every day. Is gonna keep on rising and killed it on TCast the other day, and we're gonna see him later on with Rachel. And of course, again, I'll be on with Rachel tomorrow night. I hope you guys like this. I hope you guys liked Prestige. Again, Christopher Priest, 1995. And again, we're continuing our 90s theme. I hope if you want to check out the movie, 2006, Prestige, Christopher Nolan. Um, so if you guys want, again, one more time before we go, if you guys want to see me cover any films, any books, please drop a fat chat via PayPal or whatever, and give me some ideas for things to cover that you want me to cover. Drop some names of some films and books, and I will do that. Okay, so that's about all I got. Thank you to my sister out there. I love you too. I remember very vividly going to see this with my sister again in Williamsburg, 2006. Seen this movie a bunch of, many times. Shouts out to all of our friends and family out there. Shouts out to everybody in our communities where we live, our friends, our family, um, our pets, our best friends. Shouts out to JD, Rachel, Andy, Kristen, Slowboy Whiteboard, Jerry, Church of the Eternal Logos, Jethro. Shouts out to everybody out there. Thank you, everybody, for supporting me. Really appreciate you. Please come back and watch a rewatch of this or whatever. Give me a shout out. Drop me an email at madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com. And that's about all I got, y'all. So I'll see y'all in a few minutes over at Cotel. Love y'all. Peace. Love you. Peace.